Hello and welcome, dear friends. We are so grateful that you've chosen to spend your precious time with us today. Your presence here truly means the world to us, and we never take it for granted. Before we begin, we kindly ask for your support. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It may seem like a small gesture, but it helps us continue bringing you powerful stories every week. And we believe from the bottom of our hearts that God will bless you abundantly for supporting us. We would love for you to stay with us all the way to the end of this story because every twist and turn carries meaning, and the ending will leave you with something to think about. So sit back, relax, and join us on this journey. We promise you, it's one you won't forget. Chapter 1. The Priced Betrayal. The man I had shared 20 years with stood in court demanding two things: $9.5 million and the deed to my family's ranch. His voice carried through the oak-paneled room with a confidence that felt like betrayal sharpened into a blade. For him, this wasn't just a divorce hearing. It was a hunt, and the prize was everything I had left. What he didn't know was that in my purse, carefully folded and notarized, was a single document that would change everything. To understand how we got here, you need to know who I am. My name is Lauren Donovan, and I've spent nearly every day of my life on the Donovan Ranch, 400 acres of rolling pasture, weathered barns, and a house built by my great-grandfather with his own calloused hands. For outsiders, land is dirt. For us, it is identity. Every fence post was set by family. Every trail cut into the grass was worn by horses and cattle raised by our bloodline. The ranch was never just property, it was a living history, a promise to every Donovan who came before me that we'd keep it alive. When I married Patrick 20 years ago, I thought I was adding another caretaker to that promise. He wasn't born to this land, but he swore he loved it almost as much as I did. I believed him. Maybe I wanted to believe him, because loving Patrick meant believing in a future where I didn't have to hold the burden alone. Through the years, I balanced more than most people would ever know. I raised our two children, who grew up chasing calves and climbing hay bales. I helped Patrick launch his construction company, keeping the books when he worked late into the night. I handled payroll when jobs slowed, and when workers needed paying, it was me who dipped into my savings to cover them. My own hands carried the weight of both ranch and marriage, often in silence. People sometimes think sacrifice is grand gestures, selling everything, risking it all. But sacrifice is quieter than that. It's cooking dinner alone at 9 p.m. because your husband is networking. It's putting off replacing the broken kitchen roof because his business loan needed another payment. It's standing in the middle of a pasture in the dead of winter, wondering if you'll be the last Donovan left to fight for this land. And still, I did it all. Not because I had to, but because I believed in us. That belief was tested more times than I can count. Patrick always had expensive taste. Cars, watches, business suits that didn't belong on a ranchman. I told myself it was harmless, that he needed to impress clients, that it was good for business. But with each year, his distance grew. He stopped talking about the land, about our kids' futures, about we. Instead, everything was about what he deserved, what he was owed. By the time he filed for divorce, I wasn't even surprised. What did shock me, though, was his demand. $9.5 million. And my family's ranch. It was as if he had reached inside my chest and tried to rip out both my heart and the ground it beat upon. His lawyer painted me as a selfish woman hoarding generational wealth, standing in the way of Patrick's hard-earned share. They framed me as an obstacle, not a partner who had carried him this far. It was a grotesque rewriting of history, and for a moment, even I questioned whether my sacrifices had been invisible all along. But then I remembered something. A conversation with my father before he passed away. He had leaned on his cane, eyes tired but fierce, and told me, "Never let this land fall into the wrong hands. Promise me, Lauren." I had promised, and I had kept proof of that promise. Tucked safely in my purse was a single notarized agreement, signed, witnessed, and sealed, that Patrick didn't know existed. It was my insurance, my shield, my ace in the hole. As I sat in that courtroom, his words echoing about millions and deeds, I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I simply let him dig himself deeper, weaving arrogance into a noose. What he thought was power was actually weakness, because truth, once revealed, cuts sharper than any demand. And yet, despite everything, despite the vows we had once made, despite the nights I stayed awake worrying about payroll, despite raising our children while he built an empire of ego, Patrick was about to strip me of it all. Or so he thought. What would you do in that courtroom? Confront him immediately and fight every false word? Or stay silent until the right moment, holding your proof like a weapon no one saw coming? Chapter 2. The Quiet Resolve. The first confrontation came at the pretrial hearing, and I'll never forget the look on Patrick's face. It wasn't sorrow, or regret, or even anger. It was entitlement. He stood tall, his designer suit crisp under the fluorescent courtroom lights, and with a voice as smooth as honey laced with poison, he demanded what he called his fair share. $9.5 million, his attorney repeated, pacing slowly before the judge, and full rights to the Donovan Ranch. Mr. Donovan invested years of his life building his wife's stability, and it is only just that he receives proper compensation. The words crashed over me like a tidal wave. $9.5 million? The ranch? My stomach nodded, but I didn't let it show. I sat still, hands folded neatly on my lap, like I was watching someone else's trial. On the inside, though, a storm was building. Patrick glanced at me once, just once, and in that glance was everything. Smugness, triumph, the look of a man who believed he had already won. He didn't see a wife anymore. He didn't even see a woman. He saw an obstacle to his empire. I could almost hear my father's voice, steady as ever, "Never let this land fall into the wrong hands." That reminder kept my chin lifted as Patrick's lawyer continued his performance, painting him as a man who had sacrificed his best years for me, who deserved more than money, who deserved legacy. When the judge adjourned, giving both parties time to prepare for the formal trial, I rose quietly, every step deliberate. I didn't look at Patrick. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than his boasts. Outside the courtroom, I found a familiar figure leaning against a marble column, a leather folder tucked under one arm. Sarah Whitman, my childhood friend, college roommate, and now one of the sharpest attorneys in the county. "Lauren," she said, her voice low, her eyes burning. "He really went for it, didn't he?" "Everything," I replied. "The money. The ranch. My father's legacy." She straightened, her jaw tightening. "Then we give him nothing." Sarah had always been a fighter. As kids, she once stood between me and 3 bullies at school, daring them to take another step. She carried that fire into her career, and though she usually specialized in corporate disputes, she didn't hesitate for a second when I asked her to represent me. "Let's go back to my office," she said, already striding toward the exit. "We need to start building the wall he'll never climb." Her office smelled of leather and paper, shelves lined with legal texts and binders that looked like they could crush a person if they fell. Sarah poured 2 coffees, slid one across the table to me, and opened her folder. "He's bold," she began, flipping through notes. "But bold doesn't mean smart. We need leverage. Real leverage. What do we have?" I reached into my purse and tapped the edge of the sealed envelope, the document from my father. "This is the nuclear option. But I don't want to use it yet. I want to see what he's really after." Sarah nodded. "But hold it until we need it." "What else?" That's when I remembered. A late-night phone call months earlier, Patrick's voice carrying through the walls of our house while he thought I was asleep. He was speaking to someone. His partner, maybe, or an investor. "Don't worry," he'd said, "once I get control of the ranch, the rest will fall into place." The words had chilled me then. Now they burned like fuel. "I think he's planning something bigger," I told her. "The ranch isn't just a trophy, it's part of a deal." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "We'll find out." She pulled her laptop closer, her fingers moving fast over the keys. "Start with his emails, business filings, bank records. We need a trail. Anything we can use to show manipulation, hidden motives, financial pressure." That night, I sat at her desk scrolling through accounts I still had joint access to. Patrick had underestimated me. While he preened in court, I dug quietly through transactions. And there it was, A transfer of $250,000 to a company I'd never heard of. Southland Development LLC. The memo line was vague. Consulting fee. Consulting? Sarah muttered, looking over my shoulder. That's laundering code if I've ever seen it. And there was more. Dozens of smaller transfers, all in the last 6 months. Amounts that didn't match his supposed business expenses. This isn't about $9 million, I said slowly. He's drowning. He needs a bailout. Sarah leaned back, her expression hardened. Then he's not fighting for fairness. He's fighting for survival. That makes him dangerous. But it also makes him sloppy. I should have been terrified. My marriage was gone, my husband was trying to strip me bare, and the fight ahead looked brutal. But sitting there with Sarah, surrounded by evidence of his desperation, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't crumble. I would plan. And if Patrick thought he was the only one capable of strategy, he was about to learn otherwise. Chapter 3. Hidden Hunger. I met Patrick Donovan 22 years ago at a fundraiser in Dallas. I wasn't supposed to be there. My cousin had dragged me along, insisting I needed to get off the ranch for once and see the world. I wore a plain blue dress that had been hanging in my closet since college graduation, nothing fancy, nothing like the glittering gowns I saw around me. Patrick was impossible to miss. He worked the room with the confidence of a man twice his age, shaking hands, making people laugh, leaning in just enough to make women blush and men nod approvingly. His hair was perfectly styled, his suit pressed sharp, but it was his eyes that caught me, not because they were soft or kind, but because they were hungry. Hungry for attention. Hungry for approval. Hungry for more. I should have recognized it then. But back then I saw something else. I saw ambition. The very opposite of my quiet, rooted life. He walked straight up to me, offered his hand, and said, "You look like the only person here who hasn't rehearsed a smile in the mirror." I laughed. A genuine laugh, surprised and disarmed. That was Patrick's gift. He knew how to say just enough to make you feel seen, even if he was really only seeing himself reflected back. We talked for hours that night. He told me about his dreams, building his own company, making a name beyond the small town he grew up in. I told him about the ranch, about my father, about the kind of life that doesn't make headlines but leaves footprints that last generations. He said he admired that. He said he wanted to be part of it. And when he looked at me, I wanted to believe him. Our courtship was fast. Too fast, maybe. Within a year, we were married. My father was skeptical, but he bit his tongue. He wanted me happy, and Patrick seemed to make me happy. In the early years, he did. He brought laughter, excitement, a sense of possibility. He bought me little gifts I never asked for, whisked me away for weekends when we could barely afford gas, and whispered about all the things he would achieve one day. But ambition is a double-edged sword. While I found fulfillment in building our family and tending the ranch, Patrick's appetite only grew. He never seemed satisfied with what we had. If we bought a new truck, he wanted a bigger one. If we expanded the ranch by a few acres, he asked why we weren't doubling it. When my father praised my hard work, Patrick sulked for days. It was as if my stability reminded him of his own restlessness. The first risky deal came 5 years into our marriage. A construction venture with friends he swore were visionaries. They pitched a luxury development just outside Fort Worth. Patrick was obsessed, convinced it would make him rich overnight. I begged caution. He signed anyway. Within 18 months, the deal collapsed, leaving him with nothing but debt and strained friendships. I paid off the creditors quietly, dipping into ranch profits I had promised myself I'd never touch. I told myself it was temporary, that he had learned his lesson. He thanked me, swore he'd be more careful. For a while he was. But hunger doesn't vanish. It only hides. Over the years, the pattern repeated. Bold promises, bigger risks, inevitable collapse. A real estate flip gone wrong. A partnership with a supplier who turned out to be crooked. Investments in can't-miss tech startups that vanished in 6 months. Each time I patched the holes. Each time, I believed him when he said he'd do better. And each time, a little piece of me wondered, why wasn't our life enough? We had 2 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, and a roof over our heads that generations had worked for. But to Patrick, it was never enough. The ranch wasn't a legacy to be protected. It was collateral. Looking back, the signs were always there. He loved the spotlight, not the substance. He boasted about deals before they closed, bragged about profits that hadn't materialized, and carried himself like a man who already had what he only dreamed of. When he shook hands, he squeezed just a little too long, like he was proving dominance. When he spoke about our family, it was always my ranch, my children, my investments. The word ours vanished from his vocabulary long before the divorce papers arrived. I should have seen how dangerous that hunger could become. But love makes excuses. I told myself he was stressed, that he wanted to provide more for the children, that his ambition was just misdirected energy. And maybe all of that was true, but underneath, the truth was simpler. Patrick wanted power, and power is never satisfied. One evening, about 2 years before the trial, I found him in his office staring at the ranch deed. The paper lay flat on his desk, his glass of whiskey sweating a dark ring onto the wood. "What are you looking at?" I asked gently. "Future," he muttered. "Do you have any idea what this land could be worth if we developed just half of it?" My heart dropped. "Patrick, this land isn't for development. It's for our family. It always has been." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, I realized we didn't share the same dream. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was calculating. Dreams change, Lorne. You can't keep living like it's 1950. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind move through the trees outside. The same trees my grandfather planted. The same ones my children climbed. And I knew then that one day, Patrick's hunger would come for the ranch. I just didn't know how soon. Over the years, debts piled higher. Some he told me about, others I discovered accidentally, a credit card I hadn't seen before, invoices tucked away in drawers, late-night calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. I pieced together enough to know he was in trouble, but not enough to stop him. And then came the demand in court. $9.5 million. And the ranch. He wasn't asking because he believed he deserved it. He was asking because he needed it. He needed a lifeline, and he thought he could carve it out of me. People often say betrayal comes suddenly. But that's not true. Betrayal is a shadow that lengthens over years, creeping closer until one day, it stands at your door. Patrick's shadow had been growing since the day I met him. Charm disguising hunger, ambition disguising greed. His hunger for power was always there. I just didn't see how far he'd go. Chapter 4. The Silent Erosion. Sarah moved fast. By the next morning she'd already filed discovery requests and pushed subpoenas for Patrick's bank records, corporate filings, and email correspondences. She also brought in someone she trusted, a quiet, compact man with careful eyes who introduced himself as Ethan Cole, a licensed private investigator who'd spent 15 years tracing money that didn't want to be found. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mrs. Donovan," he said, nodding to me once before setting a slim laptop on Sarah's conference table, "if your husband is hiding debt or moving funds through shells, we're going to see the patterns. Money lies in one direction, but it tells the truth in another." Sarah folded her arms. "Start with the Southland development transfers Lauren found." Ethan brought up a simple dashboard, lines, ledgers, and colored tags that meant nothing to me at first glance. He tapped the trackpad twice. "Southland Development LLC is registered in Nevada. Manager of record is a firm called Bellerose Administrative out of Delaware. Both states are favorites for privacy filings." He glanced up. "And that's mask number 1. He overlaid banking data Sarah had already wrangled loose, outgoing wires from Patrick's primary business account, Donovan Construction, and a personal line of credit he'd opened without telling me. Ethan's finger traced the screen. 250,000 here, 32,000 there, then smaller trickles, 8,000, 12,000, 4,000 over 6 months. All labeled consulting or materials escrow. Sarah leaned in. "But no materials show up on the invoices." "Right?" Ethan said. "So where did the cash go?" He clicked again. A chart bloomed, arrows from Southland into 3 additional LLCs, Glen Oak Properties, Red Ledge Advisors, and Wyvern Holdings. Classic nesting. All three managed by the same registered agent as Southland. The net outflow from all three totals, roughly $390,000. My stomach dropped. How much debt is he carrying? Working on it, Ethan said, eyes narrowing. But these shells weren't built to handle debt. They're built to shuttle money. He opened one more pane, a calendar of transfers. Notice the cadence. First week of every month, then again on the 15th. Those are debt service days for short-term notes. My bet? He's paying someone we haven't seen yet. Who? I asked. We'll know when the subpoenas land, Sarah said, already jotting a list. And we'll ask for lender correspondence and promissory notes in discovery. Ethan nodded. In the meantime, I'll pull county recorder data. If he's pledged anything as collateral, the UCC filings may be public, even if the lender is private. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. People who move money through shells always tell themselves a story. I'm just smoothing cash flow. I'll pay it back next quarter. It's not really hers if I paid this or that. But the numbers don't care about stories. The numbers always add up. We'll let them speak. The next 2 days passed in a strange rhythm, the hammering silence of waiting, punctuated by Ethan's updates. I split my time between Sarah's office and the ranch, caught between legal skirmishes and the work that had always kept me sane, mending a section of fence that sagged after last winter's storms, helping our foreman, Miguel, check the heifers as calving season crept close. Work that reminded me the world could still be practical, honest, and grounded. Late one afternoon I climbed the ridge behind the house, where the pasture fell away toward a line of cottonwoods along the creek. That ridge was my quiet place. I could stand there and see nearly the whole of the Donovan spread, the south pasture dotted with cattle, the old red barn with paint peeling in stripes, the white farmhouse my great-grandfather had built with lumber he milled himself. The sun was lowering, turning the grass a bruised gold, and for a few breaths I let myself believe that none of this could really be threatened by a suit in a courtroom. Miguel came up the hill, boots eating the ground with a steady gait. Fence on the east line's holding, he said, squinting into the light. Your dad would say the posts are still stout. I smiled. He'd also say I set that line crooked the spring I learned to drive the post hole digger. Miguel's mouth twitched. He did say that. Every spring. Like it was a ritual. He studied my face. How bad is it, Senora? Bad enough, I said. Patrick wants the ranch. Miguel went very still, like a deer scenting a hunter. He'll never run it. I shook my head. He doesn't want to run it. He wants to sell it. The wind crept over the ridge, tugging my hair loose. Miguel clasped his hands, the leather of his gloves creaking. We'll fight, he said simply. We will, I told him. And I meant it even as the air tightened in my chest. After he left, I stayed on the ridge, alone with the long shadows and the far hum of the highway beyond the creek. Betrayal is its own kind of weather. It changes the way wind sounds, the way the ground feels. But standing there, boots planted on soil packed by generations of Donovans, I understood there was a difference between being hurt and being broken. I was the first. I would not be the second. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Ethan. 2 things, he said without preamble. First, there's a UCC-1 lien against Donovan Construction filed 3 months ago by a private lender, Rook Capital Partners. Floating collateral includes equipment and beneficial interest in real property acquired via spousal marital distribution. I closed my eyes. He pledged what he doesn't have. Or what he thinks he'll take, Ethan said. Second, I've got a preliminary on Southland's members. On paper it's clean. But Glen Oak Properties received a $120,000 wire from Cedar Crest Acquisitions 2 weeks before Patrick filed for divorce. Cedar Crest, I repeated. I don't know that name. You wouldn't, Ethan said. They're new. But Cedar Crest is owned by Marston Ridge Group. He paused, then added, a developer. A chill opened in my gut. What kind of developer? The kind that buys ranch land at a discount and turns it into master plan communities, he said. They've got projects all over the Southwest. And a reputation. Good reputation? Not for people who love land. I stared across the pasture until my eyes stung. So that was the story behind the shells and the transfers. Patrick wasn't just plugging leaks, he was laying a pipeline. If he got the ranch, he'd have a buyer waiting. Send me what you have, I said, my voice calm only because it had nowhere else to go. And Ethan? Yeah. Find out who's handling Marston's acquisitions in our county. Emails. Anything. On it, he said and hung up. Back at Sarah's office, the air felt charged, like a storm had parked over the conference table. Ethan projected his findings, arrows, boxes, the clean geometry of deception. Sarah stood with a legal pad, marking every new link as if she were drawing the outline of a trap. Rook Capital Partners, she said, underlining the name. Not a bank. A private fund that likes high interest, short terms, and hard collateral. If Patrick took money from them, he's under pressure. And Cedar Crest's payment to Glen Oak, Ethan added, tapping the screen. The memo was vague, retainer. Could be for an option. I looked between them. Option? Ethan nodded. Developers use option agreements to secure the right to buy a property if and when certain conditions are met. It lets them line up financing and permits without owning the land yet. Sarah's lips thinned. If Patrick is promising an option on the ranch he doesn't own, that's misrepresentation. At best. At worst. I asked. Fraud, Ethan said quietly. Sarah set the pad down. Here's what we do. We push for communications between Patrick and any representative of Marston Ridge or Cedar Crest. We look for letters of intent, term sheets, option drafts, emails, anything. If we find even one document tying Patrick's demand to a developer plan, we'll argue he's litigating in bad faith to deliver a private, prearranged deal. Judges hate that. Ethan closed the laptop. I'll also sit on the courthouse steps and pull every filing Marston has made in the last 3 years. If they've recorded options on neighboring parcels, we'll see their play. Sarah turned to me. Lauren, I'm going to say something blunt. The more we pull threads, the more Patrick will realize we're onto him. He might escalate. He might try to spook you. He might even set foot on the ranch, which he has no right to do. He won't, I said. Miguel's there. And I changed the codes. Sarah nodded once. Good. Keep your phone on you. And if anything feels off, call me first, then Ethan. I exhaled slowly. He thinks he can turn our land into cul-de-sacs. Sarah's eyes softened, just for a heartbeat. Then let's make sure the only map he leaves with is a path to the exit. We didn't have to wait long. The first round of discovery returned a trickle, then a flood. Patrick's attorneys sent over curated statements, but Sarah had already requested the underlying ledgers, and Ethan crosswalked every line. 3 wires from Rook Capital, $300,000, $150,000, $75,000, hit Patrick's accounts in the 4 months before he filed. The repayment schedule was brutal, interest only for 90 days, then balloon payments. He'd made the interest, barely, by siphoning through the shells. The balloon was coming due in 6 weeks. Desperate men make loud demands, Sarah murmured, circling dates with her pen. He timed this for leverage. There were emails too. One from a Kendra Sloan at Cedar Crest Acquisitions to a Patrick D. Not his company email, but a personal address. Confirming our call, Cedar Crest will finalize the retainer upon receipt of proof of spousal distribution or court order establishing your beneficial control. Our client requires clear title within 90 days of option exercise. Preliminary footprint attached. Sarah slid the printed email across to me. My hands trembled as I took it. Attached was a glossy rendering, streets curving where our creek ran, cul-de-sacs stamped across the south pasture, a cartoon clubhouse where the old barn stood, its red erased and replaced with a pale little rectangle labeled amenities. My throat closed. That's our land. Ethan's jaw worked. Footprints like that don't get drawn unless someone fed them parcel maps. Patrick, I said, forcing the word through my teeth. He gave them our boundaries. He told them where to carve. Sarah tapped the email. This line here, Proof of spousal distribution means Cedar Crest won't pay until a judge gives him the ranch. They're not stupid. They wanted legal coverage. That's leverage for us. I stared at the rendering until the lines blurred. In my mind, the clubhouse collapsed, the cul-de-sacs cracked, the cartoon trees withered. Then I put the paper down and folded my hands. No more wondering, I said. No more hoping he'll stop himself. He won't. We stop him. Sarah's chin lifted. We will. First, we file a motion to compel full communications with Cedar Crest and Marston. Second, we request a protective order preventing sale, transfer, option, or encumbrance of any interest in the ranch pending final judgment. And third, Ethan added, we notify Rook Capital, carefully, that any collateral tied to beneficial interest in the ranch is contested. That chills them. Private lenders don't like fog. Sarah's eyes flicked to me. And when the time is right, we show the judge your father's document. I touched the purse at my feet. Not yet, I said. But soon. That night, I drove back to the ranch under a sky so clear it seemed made of glass. The house lights glowed warm, the porch swing creaked once in the wind, and somewhere out near the creek a coyote called to another. I parked by the barn and stood for a long minute just listening to the everyday sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, Miguel's radio drifting from the bunkhouse, the low murmur of cattle settling. I made tea and carried it to the kitchen table. The table had scratches where my son had carved his initials with a butter knife, and a faded ring where my father's coffee cup had stood every morning at dawn. I set my phone beside the mug, resisting the urge to scroll through Ethan's files again. The ranch didn't need my fear. It needed my steadiness. I was rinsing the cup when headlights raked across the kitchen window. My spine went rigid. The engine idled, then clicked off. Footsteps on gravel. The knock at the back door was firm, a little too familiar. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it. Patrick stood on the stoop, smile polished, eyes flat. Lauren. I kept the door frame between us. You don't have a right to be here. Still my home, he said, glancing past me like he could see into the kitchen's old wood and the years it had held. For now. Say what you came to say. He put his hands in his coat pockets, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was performing calm. Let's stop playing games. You can't afford to fight me. You think you can, but you can't. Sell me the ranch rights voluntarily, and I'll reduce my cash demand. We can be adults. Adults. As if adulthood was measured in how cleanly you cut throats. No, I said, voice steady. He leaned forward a fraction. You don't want to see what happens when I'm cornered. I held his gaze until he blinked. You already showed me. For a second, the smoothness peeled back and I saw the man underneath, exhausted, angry, coiled too tight. Then he straightened. Clock's ticking, he said. For both of us. He walked away, gravel crunching under expensive boots. When his taillights disappeared at the bend, I locked the door and slid the deadbolt, my hands only shaking when the silence settled again. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Ethan. Pulling something you should see. Marston filed a preliminary with the County Utilities Board for capacity review. It includes parcel IDs and a draft option agreement naming the seller as Party D. Initials match Patrick's. A cold shiver went through me. Utilities review meant seriousness. It meant the machine was already rolling, purring toward our fences. I typed with fingers that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. Send it. We file the protective order first thing. Sarah's reply appeared seconds later. Already drafting. And Lauren, this changes the tone. Judges hate when family court is used to push third-party land grabs. He overplayed. I stared at the door where Patrick had stood. The wind rattled it once, then fell quiet. Because Patrick had just shown me his endgame. If he won, the ranch would be sold to outside developers. The creek would be redirected, the ridge shaved, the barn erased. And the land that remembered my family's footsteps would forget us. Not while I was breathing. Chapter 5. The Forged Trust. The packet arrived on a Thursday morning. Sarah called me the moment she opened it. You need to come to the office. Now. Her tone wasn't sharp, it was flint striking steel. I drove into town with a knot in my chest, past the familiar fence lines and the old diner where I'd once waited tables as a teenager. It struck me how strange it was, being summoned to fight for land that had always felt inseparable from me, like a limb. Yet here I was, bracing myself for another attack. Sarah was waiting in the conference room with Ethan, stacks of papers spread across the table. She didn't waste time. Patrick's attorneys just filed exhibits for the next hearing. Look at this. She slid a sheaf of documents toward me. At the top was my own name, Lauren Donovan, in neat black print. Below it, a signature. My signature. Except it wasn't. The document claimed I had transferred partial rights of beneficial ownership in the Donovan Ranch to Patrick 3 years earlier. What is this? My voice cracked on the last word. Ethan tapped the page with one blunt finger. A forgery. But a clever one. My eyes raced over the lines. It was styled like a property agreement, complete with notary block and recording stamps. The dates matched a time when I'd been buried in hospital visits with my father, weeks before his health collapsed. Of course, I whispered. He picked the time when I was barely keeping my head above water. Sarah leaned across the table. Lauren, listen to me. If the judge believes this, Patrick doesn't just get leverage. He gets the argument that you already consented, that you're trying to back out now, which makes you look deceitful. The room tilted. 4 months, I had held on to the belief that my father's document, tucked in my purse, was the ultimate shield. Now Patrick had built his own weapon, one forged with my name. Ethan studied me. Can you swear you never signed anything like this? Yes, I said fiercely. Never. Good, Sarah said, though her face was tight. But here's the problem. He's produced something. Judges don't like ambiguity. And if this is recorded... She pulled another paper from the stack. It's been entered into county records. My heart thudded. Recorded? How? Notaries can be bribed. Clerks can be fooled. Or he had someone inside the recorder's office. Either way, the record exists, which means the burden shifts to us to prove it's fake. That afternoon felt like drowning in dry air. Ethan took the packet apart piece by piece, scanning barcodes, comparing stamps. Sarah paced, muttering case precedents. I just sat, staring at the shaky imitation of my own signature. At one point Sarah stopped pacing and put a hand on my shoulder. Lauren, you need to hear this. If we can't prove forgery, the judge could grant Patrick provisional rights. That means he could move forward with a sale while the case is still pending. The words landed like a hammer. Provisional rights. That meant bulldozers. Developers. The ranch gone before we even got our day in court. I pressed my fists against my knees, trying to steady my breath. I could almost hear Patrick's voice, smooth and taunting, clocks ticking. For both of us. That night I walked the pastures until the moon was high. The cattle shifted in the grass, their silhouettes quiet guardians of the land. I thought about my father's weathered hands guiding mine on the reins, about the promise I'd made to him. And I thought about my children, about what it would mean to lose the home that had raised them. Anger flared, sharp enough to choke me. For one wild moment, I thought about fighting Patrick on his terms. If he forged documents, maybe I could too. Maybe I could dredge up every dark secret he'd ever hidden and scorch him with it, true or not. But the thought curdled fast. That wasn't me. That wasn't the Donovan way. My father had taught me something else, something simple but hard. Truth is slow, but it's steel. Lies are fast, but they rust. I sank to my knees in the dirt and pressed my palm flat against the earth. The soil was cool, steady. It had seen storms before. It would see them again. No, I whispered into the night. I'll win with truth. The next morning, Sarah and Ethan were waiting. I've pulled the notary log, Ethan said. The woman who supposedly notarized your signature was working that month. But there's a problem. She swore she never notarized a document for you, and her logbook backs it up. The seal was photocopied from another filing. Relief flickered. So it's provable? It's a start, Ethan said. But courts don't throw out records easily. We'll need expert analysis, handwriting comparisons, forensic document examiners. And that takes time. Which we don't have, Sarah muttered. She rubbed her forehead. The next hearing is in 10 days. and the developer's option clock is running. She looked at me. Lauren, we're at a crossroads. We can either push hard now, risk everything on proving this forgery before the judge rules, or we can try to stall, buy more time, and hope Patrick slips up again. I gripped the edge of the table. What happens if the judge sides with him? Sarah's eyes didn't waver. Then he gets provisional rights. And the developers move in. The room was silent except for the hum of the AC. My heart pounded like hoofbeats in my chest. Finally I said, we fight. With truth. No stalling, no tricks. We prove it's a forgery before the judge rules. Sarah studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Then we prepare for war. For the next week, my life was a blur of ink and paper. Ethan brought in a forensic handwriting analyst who studied every loop and stroke of the forged signature. The expert's opinion was clear. The signature was simulated, not genuine. Meanwhile, Sarah tracked the recording trail. She uncovered irregularities in the clerk's office. The document had been stamped after hours, logged on a day when the clerk was on vacation. Someone had tampered with the system. Piece by piece, the forgery unraveled. But would it unravel fast enough? On the 8th day, Sarah called me again. He's moving quicker than I thought, she said. Patrick's attorneys just filed a motion for summary judgment, basically asking the judge to grant him the ranch rights immediately based on the agreement. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. When's the hearing? 5 days. 5 days. 5 days to prove the man I had once loved was willing to falsify my name to steal everything. The night before the hearing, I sat in my father's old study, the document he left me spread on the desk. His voice echoed in memory, "Never let this land fall into the wrong hands." The fire in the hearth burned low, shadows flickering across the room. I thought about the years I'd spent carrying Patrick's debts, his dreams, his hunger. And now, here we were, at the edge of a cliff he had built himself. My hand trembled as I touched the envelope. Tomorrow I would use it. Tomorrow, the truth would finally have its say. If justice stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe. We've got more every week. When dawn came, I stood on the porch, coffee warm in my hands. The land stretched out before me, quiet, waiting. By nightfall, I would know if it still belonged to us, or if the gavel would hand it to men who saw only dollar signs. The court deadline loomed like a storm cloud, and everything, the ranch, my children's inheritance, my father's promise, hinged on a single shot. Chapter 6, Father's Promise. The week before the hearing became a blur of evidence hunts and sleepless nights. Sarah's office looked less like a law practice and more like a war room. Papers spread across the table, sticky notes marking exhibits, Ethan's laptop open to endless webs of transactions and emails. Patrick thought he had cornered me with forged agreements. But he had underestimated two things: the steadiness of truth and the stubbornness of a Donovan. Ethan was first to speak. "I've confirmed it. Patrick funneled money illegally." He swiveled his laptop toward us. On the screen was a spreadsheet, dates, amounts, arrows linking one shell company to another. He tapped each line like a drummer hitting a beat. "Here's Donovan Construction," he said, pointing to the first column. "Funds wired out under consulting fees." "Then here's Southland Development, receiving those funds. From Southland, the money goes into Glen Oak and Red Ledge. But watch this," he highlighted a line. "A transfer of $90,000 from Red Ledge into his personal brokerage account, labeled as a loan repayment." Sarah leaned in. "Loan repayments are fine, if a loan exists. But there's no loan agreement, no promissory note. He essentially paid himself with siphoned company funds." "In other words," Ethan said, "embezzlement disguised as business flow." My chest tightened. "And if the judge sees this?" Sarah smiled thinly. "It paints Patrick as a man not just greedy, but dishonest in every financial dealing. That undermines his credibility." Sarah slid a printed thread across the table. These came from discovery emails between Patrick and one of his foremen. The subject line read, "Need you on my side." I skimmed, the words burning hotter with each line. "If this goes to court, you testify that Lauren signed the agreement willingly." You were there, remember? That's all you have to say. I'll make it worth your while. It was signed, plainly, by Patrick. Sarah tapped the page. That's coercion. Attempted witness tampering. Judges loathe it. And if we get the foreman under oath, we can make him admit the pressure. Ethan added, already spoke with him. He's nervous, but he knows Patrick can't shield him anymore. He's willing to testify that the email was real. I folded the paper, my fingers trembling, not from fear, but from anger. Patrick wasn't just lying to the court. He was dragging others into his web, trying to make accomplices of men who had worked on my land for years. Here's where it all unravels, Sarah said, pulling out another sheet. Patrick swears you signed that agreement 3 years ago in March. I nodded. That's what the forged document said. Sarah slid over a hospital record, my father's name, my signature at the bottom of a consent form. The date, the very day Patrick claimed I was signing away my rights. I stared at it, realization dawning. That was the week I was at the hospital every day. Exactly, Sarah said. We'll show you were physically elsewhere. With witnesses. Nurses, doctors, relatives. The idea you met with a notary on that date collapses. Ethan grinned. Fraudsters always miss one thread. And this is it. 4 hours, we rehearsed how to introduce evidence without showing our full hand too soon. But at the heart of it all was the document in my purse, the notarized agreement my father had insisted on, protecting the ranch from marital claims. Sarah picked it up with both hands, reverent as if it were fragile glass. This is the hammer. Once we drop this, Patrick's entire case against the ranch shatters. But we only get to use it once. Timing is everything. I touched the envelope. My father's handwriting was still on the outer fold, his strong cursive spelling my name. I thought of his warning, never let this land fall into the wrong hands. He won't, I whispered. Not while I'm breathing. That night I returned to the ranch. The stars were sharp, scattered diamonds across a velvet sky. I walked the fence line with a lantern, as if the land itself needed reassurance. At one point, I leaned against a post, the rough wood biting into my palms. 20 years married, I thought. And now my husband will face me in court as though I were his enemy. The cattle lowed softly in the distance. The night was quiet, but inside me, everything burned. The next morning, Patrick arrived at court before I did. He was already seated when I walked in, his suit pressed, his cufflinks gleaming. He leaned back in his chair like a king surveying conquered land. When his eyes met mine, he smirked. Not the nervous smile of a man afraid of exposure, but the smug grin of someone who believed himself untouchable. I sat beside Sarah, the envelope heavy in my purse. The judge entered. The bailiff called the room to order. The battle for the Donovan Ranch was about to begin. Chapter 7. The Final Strike. The courtroom felt colder than it should have, as if the air itself had been conditioned to discourage warmth. Fluorescence hummed overhead. The state seal glinted behind the bench. I took my seat beside Sarah, the envelope in my purse pressing against my hip like a pulse. Across the aisle, Patrick sat with 2 attorneys and the same polished certainty he'd brought to every fight he ever chose. Shoulders back, jaw lifted, the look of a man who expected the room to accommodate him. All rise. The judge entered, Honorable Miriam Cole, silver hair swept into a low knot, readers perched on the end of her nose. She had the manner of someone who'd seen every human fault paraded as a legal argument and had grown allergic to theater. Be seated, she said, then glanced at the docket. We're here on Mr. Donovan's motion for summary adjudication, requesting provisional ownership rights in the Donovan Ranch based on an asserted prior agreement, and on Mrs. Donovan's motion for protective order and to strike said agreement. Counsel appearances for the record. Names were stated. Pens clicked. Paper shuffled. The clock on the far wall ticked with the dispassionate rhythm of time that belongs to no one. Patrick's lead attorney rose. Tall, burnished, with a voice tuned for juries he wouldn't need today. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. 3 years ago, Mrs. Donovan signed a transfer granting my client a beneficial interest in the family ranch. The document was duly recorded. Today we ask this court to recognize that transfer and grant Mr. Donovan the provisional control required to protect the property's value while the remaining issues are litigated. Additionally, my client is entitled to a cash distribution of $9.5 million, reflecting his contributions to the marital estate. He spoke $9.5 million, the way a man slides a chip stack across felt. Sarah rose when he finished, calm as a surgeon. Good morning, Your Honor. We're prepared to show, conclusively, that the supposed transfer is a forgery. We'll also demonstrate Mr. Donovan's bad faith litigation posture, including coercive communications and a prearranged plan to sell the ranch to third-party developers upon receipt of provisional control. We ask the court to strike the forged instrument, issue a protective order, and consider sanctions. Judge Cole leaned back. Mr. Hale, she addressed Patrick's attorney, your motion hangs entirely on a document. I will hear first why I should trust it. Then I will hear why I should not. He nodded, confident. Your Honor, the instrument speaks for itself. He lifted a copy. Signed by Mrs. Donovan, notarized, recorded. The date is March 12, 3 years ago. The consideration is outlined. The scope is clear. The county recording stamp is present. He set it on the evidence cart like an altar offering. Thank you, the judge said. Ms. Whitman? Sarah didn't touch the document. We'll proceed in 3 parts: the notary, the timeline, and Mr. Donovan's subsequent conduct. She called the first witness, the notary whose seal appeared on the forgery. A middle-aged woman with careful hair and a composure born of a job that lives or dies on details. Once sworn, she answered with crisp certainty. Did you notarize Mrs. Donovan's signature on this instrument? No. Did you ever meet Mrs. Donovan? I did not. Is this your seal? It appears to be an image of my seal. Sarah slid a logbook onto the podium. Your notary log for March 12, 3 years ago. Does it contain any entry for Lauren Donovan? No. Were you working that day? I was. In the office from 8 to 5. Did you notarize any property transfers that day? Neither to a Donovan. Could your seal image be copied onto a separate document without your knowledge? The notary's mouth set. If someone scanned a document I notarized and lifted the seal image, yes. Judge Cole's pen scratched a note. Cross, she asked. Patrick's attorney attempted to sow haze. Mistaken memory, busy offices, possible walk-in. The notary didn't budge. Her logbook was the law of her work. It had no Lauren Donovan in it. The seal was a ghost laid over a lie. Next, the judge said. Sarah called the hospital records custodian. A quiet woman whose job resided in immaculate data. She authenticated records showing where I'd been on March 12, 3 years ago, at St. Luke's Hospital signing consent forms for my father's procedures, my signature captured and time-stamped in a way no clever clerk could backdate. Distance between St. Luke's and the notary's office? Sarah asked. 42 miles, the custodian replied. Time window between forms? 2 signatures, 10:41 a.m. and 1:12 p.m. Sarah let the math hang. 42 miles. Midday. My father's illness. The notion that I'd slipped away to sign away a century of family land collapsed under the weight of ordinary logistics. Judge Cole faced Patrick's table. Mr. Hale, you're hearing what I'm hearing? We dispute the inference, Your Honor, he said smoothly. Mrs. Donovan could have signed earlier or later. The notary could have forgotten. The logbook says otherwise, the judge said, not unkindly, but with steel. Sarah turned to the second prong. We call Mr. Wayne Cutter. Wayne walked in with his hat in his hands and the posture of a man who would rather fix a fence than speak into a microphone. Sworn, he glanced at me, then at Patrick, eyes hardening. Mr. Cutter, you're a foreman at Donovan Construction? Was. Were you contacted by Mr. Donovan regarding testimony? He shifted. Yes, ma'am. Sarah slid a printed email onto the rail. Did you receive this email? Yes. Please read the highlighted line. He cleared his throat, voice tightening. If this goes to court, you testify that Lauren signed the agreement willingly. You were there, remember? That's all you have to say. I'll make it worth your while, Silence pooled. Patrick didn't move. Were you there? Sarah asked. No. I never saw her sign anything. Did you take Mr. Donovan's offer? No. Because Wayne looked like he wanted to apologize to me for receiving the email at all. Sarah saved him. No further questions. Cross-examination tried to reframe it as clarifying memory and reimbursement for time. Wayne answered each attempt with a monosyllable that made the euphemisms sound ridiculous. Now the financial spine. Ethan took the stand with the tidy, faintly academic air of a person who believes numbers are less argumentative than people. He walked the court through the flows: company account to Southland, Southland to Glen Oak and Red Ledge to Patrick's personal brokerage, lack of any loan instrument, the cadence aligned to debt service dates, the UCC won from Rook Capital pledging beneficial interest via spousal distribution. He spoke of Cedar Crest's retainer, of Marston Ridge Group's option template sent in advance, of the utilities capacity review filed quietly with parcel IDs matching Donovan acreage. Bottom line, Mr. Cole? Sarah asked. Mr. Donovan sought to secure provisional control of the ranch, not to preserve marital property, but to facilitate a prearranged transfer to a developer. The funds shuttled through Shell's show distress and misrepresentation. Patrick's attorney objected. Conclusion: speculation. The judge allowed the core testimony, limiting the adjectives. Sarah's exhibits fanned across the evidence cart like a deck you only lay down when you know exactly what the next card is. Judge Cole turned to Patrick. Mr. Donovan, I'm going to ask you a few questions directly. You need not answer if counsel advises you otherwise, but silence has optics in civil matters. Do you maintain that Mrs. Donovan signed this transfer? Yes, Your Honor, Patrick said, smooth practiced. I was there. Where? In our kitchen. Who notarized it? He hesitated. I don't recall her name. Do you recall the notary making an entry in her logbook? I wasn't looking. Do you recall your wife also signing hospital forms that same day? He licked his lips. It's been a long time. I can't account for her schedule. The judge didn't glance at the notary or the custodian. She watched Patrick. Did you offer Mr. Cutter compensation in exchange for favorable testimony? I offered to cover his time away from work, Your Honor. She let the answer sit until its euphemism grew uncomfortable. And did you or your agents discuss an option or sale of the Donovan Ranch with Cedar Crest or Marston Ridge prior to filing this motion? His jaw flexed. We discussed potential opportunities contingent on legal clarity. Contingent, she repeated. So yes. He recovered a smile. Contingent, he said again, as if the word made everything tidy. Sarah rose. Your Honor, before we rest our opposition, one final exhibit. We have held it until now out of respect for the court's time. She turned to me. It was not a theatrical nod, just a small permission. I slid the envelope from my purse. The seal crackled softly as I opened it. This, Sarah said, placing the document on the rail, is a notarized agreement executed by Lauren Donovan's father, the late James Donovan, and by Lauren Donovan, dated 9 years ago. It establishes a separate, irrevocable family trust holding title to the Donovan Ranch, with a specific clause insulating it from marital claims, encumbrances, or distribution in the event of divorce or insolvency. It was signed at the law offices of Baker and Greeley. The notary's log and attorney affidavit are attached. Patrick's attorney stood. Objection, surprise. Overruled, Judge Cole said. You placed ownership at issue. Sarah continued, her voice level. The trust instrument predates the alleged transfer by 6 years. Under the trust's terms, Mrs. Donovan holds stewardship obligations. She cannot convey beneficial control without trustee consent, which has not been given and cannot be compelled by this court in a marital division. In short, even if Mr. Donovan's document were genuine, which it is not, he cannot receive what Mrs. Donovan is legally incapable of giving. The judge leaned forward, reading. Then she adjusted her glasses and read again, slower. Patrick's confidence didn't crack at once. It split in stages, first at the word irrevocable, then at insulating, then at the sight of the signatures beneath a different notary seal, the tidy proof of a past conversation he had never been part of. His attorney murmured in his ear. Patrick shook his head once, sharply, as if shaking off rain. The flush that rose along his cheekbones looked like anger, but underneath I recognized something else, a dawning comprehension that this room would not bend to charm or pressure, that the story he had curated was collapsing under weight it could not carry. Judge Cole set the trust instrument down. "Mr. Hale, anything further in support of your motion?" He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we believe there are factual disputes requiring a fuller hearing." "There are," she said, "which is why summary adjudication is inappropriate when the document you rely upon is contradicted by notary logs, hospital records, and evidence of post hoc leverage. As to the ranch, this trust instrument complicates matters in a way your motion did not adequately address." Sarah stood. "Your Honor, we renew our request for a protective order enjoining any sale, option, or encumbrance related to the ranch, and we move to strike the forged instrument from the record pending forensic examination. We also request the court refer the apparent notarial fraud and potential witness tampering to the appropriate authorities." Patrick's attorney objected to nearly every noun. The judge raised a hand and the room quieted, the way pastures quiet when thunder decides whether to turn or break. "This is my ruling," she said, voice even. "Mr. Donovan's motion for provisional control is denied. The instrument purporting to transfer beneficial interest is suspended from effect pending a full evidentiary hearing. Meanwhile, the court issues a protective order prohibiting any sale, option, pledge, or encumbrance of the Donovan Ranch by either party. Counsel will coordinate with the clerk to schedule forensic review of the allegedly notarized document. Additionally, the email to Mr. Cutter and the financial flows described raise concerns beyond domestic division. I am referring copies to the district attorney's office for assessment." Patrick's hand tightened on the table edge. His attorney touched his sleeve. He pulled away, small gesture, but in a courtroom where micro-movements tell stories, it was loud. The judge wasn't finished. "One more note," she said, looking directly at Patrick. "Family court is not a lever for third-party land schemes. If either party uses this process to advantage outside deals, I will respond accordingly." "Your Honor," Sarah said, "we appreciate the court's clarity. One final housekeeping matter. Mrs. Donovan has made certain the ranch's operations continue uninterrupted. We ask that the protective order expressly allow ordinary course activities." "Granted," the judge said. "File a proposed order by end of day." The bailiff called the next case. The spell broke. People stood, whispered, shuffled, left. Papers slid back into briefcases. Patrick remained seated for a moment as his attorneys gathered their things. The mask tried to reassemble, the public smile reassert its geometry. It didn't fit as easily now. He looked at me, really looked, as if seeing, perhaps for the first time, that resolve could be quiet and still win. That truth, slow as steel, had arrived. He stood. For a heartbeat we were eye level. He opened his mouth, maybe to spin a new story, maybe to threaten, maybe to plead. Nothing came. He turned and walked out, shoulders a fraction lower than when he'd come in. Sarah exhaled, a breath that carried weeks. Ethan gave a single, satisfied nod. I rested my hand on my purse, feeling only fabric now. The document had done what it needed to do, not humiliate him, not theatrically devastate him, but simply align the court to what had always been true about the land and my duty to it. Out in the corridor, the courthouse windows threw rectangles of bright afternoon onto polished tile. I paused there, letting the light warm my face. Somewhere between the notary's log and my father's signature, between numbers that told the truth and men who would not, the axis had shifted. The ranch was safe, today. The case would grind on. There would be more filings, more strategy, more attempts to pry. But the momentum had turned. And the look in Patrick's eyes when irrevocable found him, that might be the first honest thing he'd shown me in years. From your seat in that courtroom, what felt like the real turning point, the cold math of the money trail and timeline, or the moment the hidden trust document landed. Chapter 8, The Shattered Empire. The weeks after the hearing unfolded like the slow breaking of a storm. 4 months, Patrick had controlled the narrative, spinning stories of sacrifice, entitlement, and ownership, but the courtroom stripped away the polish. Now, one headline after another carried his name, not as the respected contractor he'd once pretended to be, but as a man under investigation. It started with the district attorney's office. Sarah's referral, combined with Ethan's meticulous spreadsheets, opened the floodgates. Investigators subpoenaed bank records, interviewed former employees, and followed the money trail Patrick had woven through shells and shadows. Within a month, news broke. Donovan Construction was under federal scrutiny for wire fraud, embezzlement, and potential tax evasion. The empire he'd bragged about at dinner parties was suddenly a house of cards collapsing in full view. Clients withdrew contracts. Investors demanded their money back. Equipment leases were repossessed. By early fall, the office lights at Donovan Construction flickered out for good, the company logo peeled from the side of trucks sold at auction. Patrick fought in court, of course. He filed motions, gave interviews, tried to reclaim his image as a wronged man. But each filing, each interview, only made him look smaller against the growing pile of evidence. Judges weren't swayed by charm. Creditors weren't patient. The world he'd built on appearances cracked wide open, and everyone could see the hollow center. Through it all, the Donovan Ranch stood unchanged. The protective order froze it in place, immune to his schemes. And when the court eventually struck the forged agreement from the record, declaring it a nullity, procured by fraudulent means, it was more than a legal victory. It was vindication. The ranch remained where it had always been, 400 acres of rolling pasture, barns weathered but standing, soil dark with promise. But now, its survival wasn't just a matter of law. It was a matter of principle. For the first time since Patrick's text, "Don't bother coming home," I knew the land was safe. Sarah placed the order in my hands one afternoon, her smile tired but genuine. "It's yours, Lauren. Untouchable." I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, thinking of my father. The promise I'd made to him had been tested in ways I could never have imagined. But I had kept it. The ranch would not fall into the wrong hands. The hardest part, though, wasn't the courtroom battles or the endless filings. It was watching my children wrestle with the wreckage of their father's choices. Trevor, 16, had carried anger like a shield, anger at me, at Patrick, at the whole fractured family. Amelia, 14, had slipped between denial and sadness, clinging to the hope that maybe, somehow, her father's words held some truth. But as the evidence came out, emails, bank statements, testimony, the fog lifted. They saw the man who had once tucked them into bed now trying to barter away the land that had raised them. One evening after practice, Trevor sat at the kitchen table, his lacrosse stick leaning against the wall. He was quiet for a long time before he finally said, "Dad, he really lied about everything, didn't he?" I set down the dish I was drying. "He made choices that hurt all of us, yes." Trevor's jaw worked. "I hated you for a while. Because I thought you were the reason everything was falling apart. But you weren't." He looked at me then, eyes older than 16 should hold. "You were the reason it didn't." The words carved something open in me, a wound I hadn't realized I'd been holding closed. I reached across the table, and when his hand gripped mine, I knew the legacy I'd fought for was more than land. It was trust rebuilt, fragile but real. Amelia's turn came a week later. She found me on the porch at dusk, the horizon painted in shades of fire. "Mom?" she asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart. I used to believe Dad when he said you didn't care about him, about us. But you cared enough to fight." Her voice trembled. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, the warmth of her small frame. "You see it now. That's enough." Word spread quickly through the community. 4 months, gossip had swirled, neighbors whispering, speculating about who was right, who was wrong. Some thought Patrick's polished version of events sounded believable. But after the revelations, after the judge's order, the tide shifted. At the feed store, old ranchers clasped my shoulder. "You did right, Lauren," one said. "James would be proud." At church, women who had once looked away now met my eyes with respect. "We prayed for you," they said. "You stood strong." Even Miguel, usually sparing with words, paused one morning as we fixed a section of fence. "The land listens," he said, gesturing to the pasture. "It knows who belongs. It knows you kept your promise." It wasn't just my reputation restored. It was the Donovan name, burnished again, not by wealth or status, but by resilience. One evening, after the children had gone inside, I walked the land alone. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of cedar and the faint sweetness of hay. Crickets sang in the grass. The stars pressed close, bright and innumerable. I stopped at the ridge behind the house, where I could see the sweep of the entire ranch, the creek silver under moonlight, the barn standing steady, the fields stretching into shadow. I knelt and pressed my palm to the soil. It was warm still, holding the memory of the day's sun. 4 months, I'd feared this touch might be stolen from me, replaced by pavement, cul-de-sacs, strangers who'd never know the stories held in this dirt. But now it was mine. Ours. I closed my eyes and let the earth steady me. My father's voice whispered through memory, "Never let this land fall into the wrong hands." "I didn't," I whispered back. "It's safe now." The cattle shifted softly in the distance, a reminder of continuity. Life would keep moving. Seasons, storms, new trials. But for the first time in years, I wasn't bracing against loss. I was simply here. Patrick's empire was gone, and with it, the illusion he had lived inside. I didn't celebrate his fall. There was no joy in watching someone crash, even someone who had tried to destroy me. But I did feel relief, clean, sharp relief, that the fight was over, that my children knew the truth, that the Donovan Ranch would remain what it had always been. A place where love, labor, and legacy endured. I stood until the night grew deep, then turned toward the house where lights glowed warm in the windows. My children were safe inside. The land was safe beneath my feet. And though the future would bring new challenges, I carried a certainty now that could not be shaken. The Donovan Ranch was still ours. And always would be. Chapter 9. The Enduring Legacy. The morning after the final court order, I woke before the sun. For the first time in years, there was no knot in my stomach, no dread of what motion Patrick might file next, no fear of losing everything my family had built. The ranch was safe. The children were safe. And I, finally, was free. I brewed coffee and stepped onto the porch, where the horizon stretched wide and golden, lights spilling across the fields. This was the same view my father had greeted every morning, the same sky my grandparents had prayed under, the same soil where generations had labored. But it felt different now, more mine than it had ever been. The storm had passed, and in its wake, I could finally imagine a future not dictated by courtrooms or betrayals. I turned my energy towards something that had always been waiting in the background: expansion of the Donovan Ranch. For years, I had dreamed of opening a sustainable side business, farm-to-table beef, organic produce, maybe even a bed and breakfast on the ridge overlooking the creek. Patrick had laughed at the idea, calling it small time. Now, it was no longer small, it was freedom. I began meeting with local agricultural co-ops, learning about grants, exploring new markets. Ethan, my lawyer, introduced me to a friend in agribusiness who helped me sketch a 5-year plan. Miguel, the ranch hand who had stood by me through the darkest days, offered ideas on soil rotation and water conservation. For the first time, it wasn't just about preserving the land, it was about growing it into something even stronger for the future. Trevor helped on weekends, fixing fences with a quiet determination that reminded me of my father. Amelia began photographing the ranch for a school project, capturing angles of light I'd walked past 1,000 times but never truly seen. Together, we weren't just holding on to legacy. We were shaping it. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. One Saturday at the feed store, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since high school, Mark Bennett, now a veterinarian with a small clinic on the edge of town. He remembered me instantly, and though we spoke only briefly about hay suppliers and calf vaccinations, there was a warmth in his smile that lingered long after he drove away. I wasn't ready. Not yet. The wounds from Patrick's betrayal still bled beneath the surface. But for the first time, I didn't shut the door on possibility. I tucked Mark's business card into my wallet beside the court order protecting the ranch. One represented safety, the other, maybe one day, hope. The true measure of victory wasn't in the legal paperwork, it was in the quiet changes at home. Trevor began sleeping through the night again. His shoulders, once hunched with anger, relaxed when he practiced lacrosse in the backyard. He started talking about college, even mentioned maybe studying agricultural engineering to help expand the ranch. Amelia, once skeptical and withdrawn, grew closer to me. She baked with me in the kitchen, shared her school essays, and asked questions about her grandfather she'd never asked before. What was his favorite part of the ranch? She asked one evening. The soil, I told her. He said it was alive. That if you treated it with respect, it would feed you for generations. She wrote that down in her notebook, as if carving it into her own memory. The truth had set them free too, not just from Patrick's lies, but from the fear that our family's foundation could crumble overnight. Patrick didn't disappear, of course. He still tried to call the children, still attempted to paint himself as misunderstood, a victim of circumstance. But the court-supervised custody arrangements gave the children a voice, and they used it. They visited on their terms, not his. And each time they came home, they seemed lighter, less burdened by his shadow. One evening, after a particularly tense weekend, Trevor surprised me. "Mom," he said, "I don't hate Dad anymore." I braced myself. "You don't?" "No," he said. "I just don't believe him anymore. And that's enough." It was a wisdom beyond his years. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness wasn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it was simply about no longer giving someone the power to wound you. As the year closed, I found myself often reflecting on the journey. There had been days when I wanted to fight dirty, to beat Patrick at his own game, to destroy him as thoroughly as he tried to destroy me. But in the end, the weapon that saved me wasn't manipulation, or vengeance, or deceit. It was truth. A single document, signed years ago by my father, carried more power than all of Patrick's schemes combined. It was proof that integrity, though quieter and slower, outlasts greed. In the end, I told myself as I filed the final court decree away, he demanded millions and land that wasn't his. All it took was one truth on paper to bring it all crashing down. Spring arrived early that year. The pastures were greener than I remembered, and calves kicked their legs in clumsy joy. I walked the land often, alone or with the children, running my hands over fence posts, feeling the sun on my face. One evening, standing on the ridge as the sky blazed orange, I realized something. This land wasn't just my inheritance. It was my second chance. Not just to guard the past, but to build a future. For myself. For Trevor and Amelia. Maybe even for someone new, someday. I smiled, breathing deep, the smell of cedar and soil grounding me. The war was over. And the ranch, our ranch, was still ours. That's where my story ends, and maybe yours begins. Thank you so much for staying with us to the very end of this story. We truly feel honored to share these moments with you, and your time means more than words can say. If this story touched you, please don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe if you haven't already. Every single click of support keeps this channel alive, and we believe God will bless you richly for it. And don't worry, there's another incredible story coming soon. So stay with us, because each story is not just entertainment, it's a journey of justice, resilience, and truth. Until then, may peace, love, and blessings fill your life. We'll see you in the next one.